Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's module training. We're covering planning and scheduling management. With us today, we have John Pretish, the President and CEO of Success Partners, along with Stephen Gregory, our Epicor SE. John will go over the value and messaging to our prospects, and then Stephen will provide a demo. And like the last session, we'll just open it up for questions between each section. And you can either put those in chat or have those questions live when we go to that section. So this session will be recorded and placed on the Partner Program Hub under the Momentum Program Webinars widget. So with that being said, I will turn it over to you, John.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everybody. So today we're going to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, perhaps the ultimate reason why a lot of our prospects are buying the Epicor ERP system is that they're going to be able to, cost, track, and schedule. And as you're going to find out today, there's a lot that goes into that topic. All right, so today we've had some contributors on my team. I want to acknowledge Sam Perry, who's been at it for over 20 years, David Durand, who comes to us from a strong ERP background, Carrie Fleming, partner and solutions engineer currently with our firm, but has many, many years of experience, and Sean McEwen, who came to us from a customer and has worked with us extensively. I can't miss, of course, Stephen Gregory, of course, who has a lot of experience both operationally as a end user who implemented at his company, as a implementer of the Epicor product, and of course, a senior solution engineer. So thank you all for your participation. So let's get into this. We're going to cover a couple five key areas. We're going to do some questions that we should think about in qualifying a customer or a prospect, how to position the value of scheduling, what differentiators do we have, and then a demo, approximately 30 minutes by Stephen, and we'll close with 15 minutes at the end. So the big question, you're in a sales situation, you're in a customer situation, and the question arises, the requirement arises, we want to start scheduling, or we want this project to have the output as our scope of work as a strong scheduling success story. So before you dive in and start showing software, before you dive in and starting to believe what this customer or this prospect needs, I think there's an extensive amount of questioning that has to go on. And we use the term level setting, but where are they on their journey? Many times I've walked into situations and they said, well, we're going to buy the system and it's going to schedule for us. And so how do you schedule today might be a question, but one of the other questions might be, who is responsible for that in your organization? And sometimes the answer comes back, well, we're hoping the system will do that for us. And while that might be partly true, and we could kid ourselves by allowing that to continue to be a fact to the client, the reality is that they need somebody who owns it, somebody who can take the decision support that scheduling provides, make those decisions, and commit the company to those schedules. So we'll see a little later some of the levels of sophistication that we might benchmark to kind of understand where they are and the level of commitment it takes as you move up that what we call a crawl, walk, run graduated scale of sophistication. So how do you do it? What tools? We hear people, they're using a spreadsheet, they're writing down, they're using order lists, they're using whiteboards. What are they trying to achieve? Some of the companies out there are looking at, well, I need to ensure that my customer orders are on time. I'm trying to improve shop capacity. That could be a clue as to where they are on that journey, but nonetheless, it's good to dig into those. One question you might ask that can be telling as well is, who promises delivery dates? Is it sales? Is it the president? Is it head of production? Is there a collaboration? If they start to talk a bit about sales and operations planning, they're not at a basic level. They're more experienced and they're thinking about all of the things that can go into that whole supply chain delivery model around customer service. Do you have production standards? Recently, we did a presentation to a company, and the prime reason that they're buying the system, in fact, the reason they threw out the previous vendor was related to the lack of scheduling capacity or capability that they had with the other product. However, when we asked some key questions, like, what are you trying to accomplish and so on, and we showed the software, they asked us to do a modeling exercise, an actual proof of concept, and one of the challenges they had was actually coming up with standards. And so if we don't have any production standards, any metrics around how long it takes to do something, it's going to be difficult to schedule. And then finally, are you managing lead times for materials? Critical to the delivery of any product is not just the capacity, and oftentimes people think about planning and scheduling as just the capacity planning side of it. But the overall schedule is tied to the availability of other constraints. It could be tooling, it definitely could be materials. And if you're not managing lead times with your vendors, this is going to have a big impact. So this is kind of the basic level of questioning. The next level of question, once you start to realize they may actually be a little bit more sophisticated, is to start to broach the topic of, are you familiar with the concepts of finite and infinite capacity scheduling? We'll get into what that is exactly in a moment. This is part of the challenge, is you have to understand the questions you're asking, but you can also drill into, backward, forward schedules. Are you familiar with what that can do, the cause and effect? And really at this point, you're not really going to educate them as much as just find out where they are. One of the things that we also have to think about, as we always do, is what software needs will we have to solve for this customer's challenges. So when they start to speak about, well, there's about 5 products and 5 materials and a machine at this work center, and there's a number of things we need to track, if there's more than 2 constraints, the standard scheduling that comes with Epicor as a core item needs to be expanded to be the APS module so that we can handle more constraints. Not really trying to read all of this, but all of these are valid points that are worth mentioning. The concept of capable to promise versus available to promise. Oftentimes in our demonstrations, we will show off some tools, and on the journey, capable to promise is one of those further down the line items that really need a lot of moving parts to work efficiently and effectively together. So we're going to hear a little bit about that in the demo, and you'll see it. It is definitely a big flash selling feature, but it's also one that we have to be careful about. Do you schedule co-parts or byproducts? So sometimes plastics companies will have a right hand, a left hand, die cast companies. In other cases, a byproduct. When I make one of these, I also make some scrap and then we regrind it. Those are little things along the way that are just worth mentioning. Do you have common operations for multiple jobs? Could you possibly group them together or nest them? So grouping or batching and nesting are similar in concept, although they're different. Nesting on a piece of steel is multiple parts on a sheet, or they could be similar parts, they could be unlike parts, but we need to understand how that's going to flow. We get into other topics such as Kanban production. Of course, not to be confused with Kanban pull signals for purchasing. Kanban production can also offer some great real-time, I made it, I produced it, update the system, and allows for some efficiencies. And this is where we get into the questions of a dedicated resource. If your plant manager is spending, a few minutes a day looking at this versus somebody who's dedicated, is this a planner? Is this a material person? And have you considered various aspects of what we call mixed mode? So mixed mode might be I'm an engineer to order in one area, but we actually make to order or make to stock in another. These mixed combinations can offer a few complications to how the schedule might run. So as you're asking those questions, the big challenge is the pitfalls. I mentioned you really don't want to just dive in and start presenting software and, the old throw enough crap on the wall and see what sticks, it comes to mind. There is a place for an excitement demo. There is a place to give a sense of what we can do. Typically, when you get into a scheduling topic or when scheduling raises its head as being a very key thing that needs to happen in their organization, people make these big assumptions, as I mentioned earlier, about just what they can accomplish without putting any extra skin in the game. And so just like the concept of moving from a finance system with Excel to a fully integrated ERP, we can't underestimate or ignore the commitment around process and people requirements. And what I mean by that is that maturity of that process and what they're trying to solve for can be quite involved. And so when we look at it, where are they on that journey is a big importance, because in order for them to take the next step, there's going to be investments required in process and people. You know, probably the most obvious one is if you're not collecting good data off the shop floor, you're actually not even getting the feedback you need to maintain your customer service levels or make promises. So that maturity and where they are is really critical to helping that client through the next steps. So when we're selling, the big challenge our firm Success tries to really focus on reference selling. And it's so important to have a voice other than a salesperson or somebody who has a vested interest in selling a service or product to speak about just how they've been able to be successful with that. But there's some subtle little things that everybody should know. Every Epicor ERP customer, old or new, has scheduling. It's always been a part of the core of the system. How well they use it, how sophisticated they use it, is always the big challenge. And if anyone's just thrown a reference to a client and had to come back and say, well, they're not as sophisticated, they're not as much a strong user the way we want to see it, or that doesn't look like our business. What I'm trying to solve for with those questions is to make sure that you are fitting it to the right size. But do know that unlike a lot of systems, other competitive systems, that Epicor customers have scheduling. How well, as I said, how well they've set it up and how well they're maintaining it might be the challenge. So many will set up, and this is true mostly with our competitors, but I can also speak to our firm. You know, most companies will set this up as a financial costing bomb, which doesn't have as much capacity planning capability. And that's quite easy, and that's, you know, where our competitors typically lie on the spectrum. And I would say there's probably a lot of Epicor customers as well that really haven't taken the time to set up their routings, their boos, their bombs, their moms effectively to ensure that you're ready to turn on scheduling. But when we look at the reference side of things, the customers, may be trying to solve different aspects. And so understanding what the purpose of putting scheduling in place, how they went about it, will get us closer to being able to describe those stories to the client, the prospect, so that they can actually see what we're capable of. Okay, and so as I said earlier, many times they may feel that they're more complex, or that doesn't look like me. So references are big, and I would like to make a bookmark here to say that we need more. This is the only real literature that stood out. It's old, it needs to be updated. We need more companies talking about scheduling as being the core capability that solves some problems for them. And this is very dated, because I would suggest this is possibly 8 to 10 years old in terms of this profile. The company still would say these things and talk about it as being a success story, but it is a challenge to have great reference materials that we can use in the sales cycle. When we talk a little bit about the journey begins, and this is an example of when engaging with a client. In fact, we just had a client call us up, and they were very happy, and their consultant spoke to us about the fact that the project was a success. It's now been 1.5 years, going on 2. Where they're not so happy is their operations people really have not progressed in the use of scheduling. And everything was really set up to handle that. But even with that in mind, looking at the schedule and understanding how they can affect the change is challenging for most companies. And this is the people side of it, particularly in this example, where the people just didn't, even though we've trained them on it, in a basic manner, they really didn't understand the correlation between all aspects of the business. And if this company, as an example, would be pretty typical. Their planner scheduler was actually able to accomplish quite a bit with spreadsheets in the past. And now, instead of being on an island unto themselves, which wasn't very efficient, they now rely on the departments of others and all the data that comes to them. Not unlike a financial person who was running QuickBooks in the past and could plug numbers into the system, schedulers now rely on accurate processes up and downstream. So what do we mean by that? It means that the journey starts with the building blocks of data, the part master accuracy, site planning details, some notes here that you can actually dump data and upload it. And, the DMT has become a very powerful tool for companies that need to improve this accuracy. But ultimately, we need lead times on parts. We need, basic information. The next level is understanding the methods of manufacturing. Those need to be updated to really reflect accurate operational timing and constraints. Following that, it's about accurate transaction details, making sure that jobs are being closed on time, that the information that we're putting on our orders, our jobs, and reporting back are accurate. And this means that you just can't have orders that are left open that are actually canceled. So there's a whole process rigor that comes in play here. And when all of those things are in place, now this isn't an all or nothing, but typically these things have to be worked on and continuously kept in balance. At that point, you can get to an accurate schedule. And when I say schedule, I'm referring to the MRP planning cycle. So let's take another step into a little bit more about what is that. And so, you thought maybe we're just going to show the Epicor software today. This is going to be a little bit more on stepping back and understanding, before you dive in, you need to know your topic. You need to understand what's happening with the client, what we can achieve, and how we achieve it. The goal isn't to scare the customer off, but to give them an appreciation of the journey. And when we talk about the journey, if I was to reflect on, sales and operations planning from APICS, the American Production Inventory Control Society, there's a couple things that need to be highlighted. There's strategic planning. This year we want to grow by this amount, and what do we need to do? Well, tactical planning kicks in, and you start to think about, well, in order to achieve those numbers, we need to sell X. So most companies are doing some version of this, but they probably haven't broken it down to the next levels. And operational planning is really key, understanding how demand is achieved and the visibility of it. Do we get forecasts? Do we actually see those forecasts? Do we develop forecasts for and with clients because they're a big part of our business? Or do we just wait for them to, raise an order, raise a PO to us? How do we schedule that? What does that look like? How does material planning come into play with MRP? And how does, either rough cut or detailed capacity planning offer some insights and value? And what do we do with that feedback loop? So there's a lot of different ways to look at it. And obviously the execution is all about making sure that it is working and it's working well and it's kept accurate. I'm going to give you a couple other perspectives on this. So this is the high level version. And so companies doing forecasting are actually at a strategic level looking out 2 and 10 years. And then they're annually doing a business plan. And then they're monthly reflecting on sales and operations planning. At that point, they may actually discontinue products. They may elevate products that are growing, and they may actually look at the impact of capacity, look at how they might increase capability around machines and automation. So all of that comes into the resource planning, and then on a weekly and daily basis, there's a rhythm of the business. So this is far from a hands-off process where we just open up the plan and see what's going on. Although when it works really, really well, and this is the challenge for all of us, is that we can flash that and show that, and we can show the impact in real time. But the trick is to make sure that they understand the cause and effect between these linkages. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here, but the topic of sales and operation planning is such a big one and is not understood very well amongst most of our customers, I would guess, and very few are doing it really, really well. But when you talk about moving a company to the next level, you can't avoid the topic. And the topic is not something that happens overnight. It's about getting people coordinated around understanding that they can take control of the business. You know, someone would say, well, we can never change the last minute nature of our customers. Well, guess what? There are ways to manage that better and eliminate those unplanned events, particularly the ones under your control. And then moving into the next phase, eliminating failure in your business process. What do we do when something goes sideways? How do we address that? Do we assess when a machine goes down, who's going to be impacted? What are those orders that can't be late, and what do we do when they are late? Do we communicate and revise with the client? And then, you know, moving into this is really, you know, the hierarchy of a 5 to 10 year map for some firms. At least that's what Ollie White organization has stated. So today we're going to really focus on this aspect, which is finite scheduling, and really it's about the short-term sequencing of work to optimally meet your forecast or demand requirements. But we can't ignore that inventory and planning and forecast and all of these things we call sales and operations planning, S&OP, have a big effect on it. And so this is where we're going to spend our time, and this is where we're going in our presentation today. So now that we understand the topic, and we understand some of the foundational elements of knowing that the client is coming in at a certain stage of their growth or maturity of the use of systems or processes, and now we understand that the topic can be in depth and we don't want to just dive in without understanding where they are, we really need to understand the value of scheduling in order to position it for sales. It's not that it's not accomplishable, it's a challenge, but you know, so is ERP implementations as a whole. So where's the big value? Definitely customer service. Being on time grows confidence, allows you to get more customer share. You become a trusted customer supplier. Improving utilization, people, assets, it's going to result in greater profitability. Improve cash flow. You know, people talk about reducing one-time inventory, but the ongoing gift that keeps on giving is when MRP and scheduling are working together, you're managing your supply chain more effectively. You're not buying just in case, and you tighten up those relationships with your vendors and suppliers, and you're going to find that you're going to be in a better place, both from a cash flow and a profitability perspective. Predicting future events is a big topic. The idea that you can start to see, you know, just like BI allows you to see what's happening, what can happen, and what might happen if we don't take action, looking out into the future and that predictability of events is really important. You know, we have a plant shutdown, we have holidays, we need to ramp up. Are we going to be prepared? That visibility could start very simple, but it could also get very involved. Increased throughput, again, it's reducing inventory and freeing up cash, being able to scorecard your teams in your shop, get people behind it, and with dashboards on the shop floor. We'll see a couple examples of that later. In many cases, companies are running production lot sizes that are quite large and don't necessarily need to be that large. They're taking their efficiencies into factor, and often they produce at different quantities than their orders and shipments are required. Well, you can make yourself super efficient, but you can also be putting a lot of finished goods or semi-finished goods on the shelf, which can be very costly if there's a product change or a reduction in order flow. So there's a number of different reasons why that would come into play, and it would save you. And then overall operational stability, just smoother responses to changes in demand. And we all know with the current world we live in that supply chain challenges can put a wrinkle in anyone's schedule. So this is true now, it's true later, and it will continue to be true, whether it be a shipping problem, whether it be a material supply problem. Those are going to continue to happen. So when we talk a little bit about the differentiators that Epicor can bring to these challenges or these opportunities, so we know there's value, customers knows there's value, there is value there, and they're seeking that value. And so how do we position Epicor as different? Well, first off, I don't think we talk enough about Epicor as having an APS, an advanced planning and scheduling capability. So for many firms, you go out and you buy a third-party bolt-on APS, and with Epicor, that's not a third party. It's an extension to the existing product and its capability, and it provides a number of things. So when you add Epicor's APS, you immediately can do scenarios at quoting and order entry, such as capable to promise and available to promise, that calculate situations where how realistic, if I take this order now, when can we peg a delivery date with the client? And it does a little mini material and capacity requirements plan to do so. But the biggest value is the multiple constraints that I mentioned earlier. The basic scheduler, however, comes with what if and the ability to do quick scenarios, which many software packages lack. And when it comes time, particularly to apply the what if scenario, they have a lot of workarounds as to how to operationalize that. Because as you know, somebody's looking at a scenario, they're doing their what ifs, but production's happening. Things are already happening on the shop floor, and Epicor makes it very easy to accept the scenario and make it happen. For some companies, they're looking at revenue increases by increasing throughput or cash flow. Epicor has ways to do that. You can build further dashboards to measure to that. And then the ability to mix and match finite capacity and backward forward directions. So, backward scheduling is how soon do I need to start in order to finish it on time. Forward is if I start today, when will it be complete? And that mix within a job isn't all that common. And together with finite and infinite, you can see where your bottlenecks are. If I had infinite capacity, how soon could I do it? And when I run finite, where are my bottlenecks? Immediately you could see where increasing capacity could be of value. So there's some great tools there. Again, not for the faint of heart to just go in and drag and drop and see the impacts, although it can be that simple. If you get into the more sophisticated client, they're going to drive you down a lot more deeper what if scenarios. And the good news is Epicor can stand up to those. So I've mentioned the term, it's a journey. It takes time. It's not something that happens immediately. Let's dig in a little bit deeper into what that looks like. So when we're talking about the journey, consider the approach of crawl, walk, run, or level 1, 2, 3. This is the concept that you're starting at a starting point. Where are you now? Where do we need to take you? And the acknowledgement that that's not going to happen overnight. And the idea that going live with, the ability to present to clients on a portal where exactly their product is, companies like Dell and others have long allowed people to drill into their schedule and say, oh, it's released to the factory, it's in shipping, it's in transit, it's in the warehouse, etc. The ability to do that technically is very simple. The ability to do that effectively and provide information that doesn't ask more questions and cause a lot of confusion is the magic of what properly putting a scheduling system into action is all about. So when it really comes down to those capabilities, it's really understanding how and why you're going to introduce some of these things to your business, because all of them are going to have a people and process impact. So it's on that journey. We've broken this down to a couple different spots. I'm not sure why I've got a little bit of a type over here, and I'll fix that for my my hard copy of this, or my PDF copy. So we're talking about the method of manufacturing integrity. We need to understand why it's important. We need to understand supply and demand netting, sources of demand, sources of supply, things like time phase and projections. When we look at resource groups, this is the capacity that we're managing. So are there queue times? Are there move times? What are my production calendars? Does this department work on the same schedule of hours per week or shifts per week than others? So if I have one that runs one shift and others that run 2 and 3, I need to really understand and make sure that the system is set up in the data management side of things to reflect that. So are we looking at finite and infinite? Are we looking at horizons? What calendar exceptions are we managing? You know, people have planned vacations. We're bringing machines down for overhauls and maintenance. That all has to be reflected into the schedule. And perhaps, as I've highlighted at the bottom here, generating PO suggestions and processing MRP, which really relies on lead times, is a super big factor here. If we don't have purchasing as a department owning the lead time, the accurate lead time information on their purchasing items, and understanding that MRP is processing this, updating the delivery dates from vendors, so that PO will be late. Do we just hang up the phone or look at that email and say, okay, that's fine? No, we need to sit down and update that PO so that it reflects the promise dates, because MRP might choose to help you schedule something or show the scheduling system that materials will now be available at different times. Therefore, let's make sure that the shop is properly using capacity for jobs they can run when materials aren't available for other jobs. So aligning the departments is this phase, really owning the data accuracy. And this is the beginning of the people process technology marriage that has to occur. As we move into that next step, walk, I'm just going to pause here for a second. I'm going to fix my, this is now getting annoying. So bear with me here. Just going to fix my graphic. Okay, and we're back. You see my screen now? Okay, so moving back to this next step, which is crawl, then walk. The idea then is we still rely on the pillar of this, really understanding the method that that lead times are critical and that shop capacity starts to come into focus. And if you look over here to the right, what I'm saying here is that this is the stage where you can't mail it in. You actually have to have some serious commitment. And this is going to be a minimum of 50% of somebody's role, is when all the departments are committed, you're going to need somebody who really owns this. And so as you start to what we call walk, or next stage, realizing those benefits, we need to start to look at all kinds of nuances that methods of manufacturing can have. Are we moving things ahead? Do I wait till a rack of parts are completely finished before I move it to the next machine? Or do I allow things to flow from that resource on to the next? A good example of this is when you look at the very big differences between a job shop or an engineer to order equipment company compared to a high volume repetitive company. The repetitive company is just, they're moving parts down typically a conveyor line or at a rate, and there's different buffers in terms of production quantities along the way. Well, you know, there might even be operations that have cure time or paint lines that have so many parts in process that need to be considered. We need to look at those resources. We need to look at the groups. Setup groups. Do I move? A great example is, you know, either steel rolling of roof or trim, metal trim. If I have different profiles, the setting up of the tooling, it's really simple to set up one profile, but as I progress to a more complex profile, the setup gets longer. And if I move from one part to another part, the setup actually could multiply. A really basic example might be that if I start a paint line with white and I move through darker colors over the course of the day, I'm usually pretty good because the cleanup in between is pretty basic. But if I move from white to black and black back to white again, there's a full breakdown and cleanup required. So there's a lot of different ways that even the best scheduling needs to consider what's going on in reality. So we start to look at these roles of the planner scheduler, and we start to understand how the tools like production planning workbench, the buyer's workbench, how part-specific planning can start to take shape, how planning fences start to drive requirements differently when we use them, and we're scheduling things in and out. And all the while, we've got people out there that think scheduling is min, max, and safety quantities, but you may have a warehouse of spare parts that you require a certain maintenance of those parts at that level while you're producing other production that is net new product for your client. So many times an equipment company comes to us and says, we are killing ourselves because we're waiting for some parts because service grabbed the parts for a customer and we can't build the machine. And it could be as ridiculous as a 50-cent bolt is holding up a $100,000 machine from being shipped. And clearly those are the kinds of things you want to get rid of. There's a number of strategies. But in this phase, as we really zone in, it's about resource scheduling and managing load and understanding what that looks like. So for some companies, the run is, it may be part of their vision, but we have to be realistic. This requires a full dedicated resource, and the term and title, master schedule, really comes into focus. And this isn't somebody who is typically, tapped on the shoulder and told, hey, you're now going to be our master schedule. It comes along with a certain knowledge base and a certain authority within the organization, and they need support. They need, general management needs to support this role, because if purchasing isn't doing their job and we're not receiving effectively and we're not putting due dates and lead times in effectively, we're not going to be able to get ahead in terms of improving our schedules. So there's lots of things that can be done here: finite scheduling, advanced planning and scheduling, the module, capability scheduling. You can actually schedule with skills and capabilities in Epicor. Not everybody is aware of that, but it's not the kind of topic that you get into with the company who's just at the beginning of the journey. And so when you start to look at these multiple resources, you can start to predict when and where we're going to run into trouble, and accurately predict and create strategies to prevent those collisions and capacity outages to happen. And as mentioned earlier, capable to promise, it really requires a real-time, when you get into what if and capable to promise, it's real-time feedback. If you're letting people report on and off, the end of the day, the end of the week, from a production perspective, it's going to create a lot of slush in your schedule. And that means slush meaning lack of accuracy, lack of understanding of exactly where you are. And if you want the ability for someone in customer service to do a what if from a capable to promise perspective, all of those things have to be in alignment. And when somebody calls and we say, with assurances, Mr. Customer, this is where, this is where your product is and this is when it's going to ship, you want to be accurate. You don't want to be making promises you can't keep. Okay, I'm now reaching the point where I think we're ready to look at some software and capability that Epicor offers. I'm going to pass the ball over to Stephen. Stephen, can you hear me?
Great, thank you, John.
Yes, I can. Thanks, John.
While Stephen's putting his screen together, are there any questions for John on the line?
We covered a lot of territory there, so yeah, any questions on sales scenarios, we can also address those a little later if you want.
Sounds great. Thanks, John. Great job.
Okay. Can you see my screen, Danielle?
Yes, looks great.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, John, for a great lead-in to a demonstration of Kinetic. So, big topic, planning and scheduling. There is so much we could show. We sometimes in demos dedicate hours and hours to looking at this in various scenarios of what we can do with the base scheduling module and our advanced planning and scheduling embedded module that's inside of Kinetic as well. Something I learned very early on in my career is that the best schedule is when it's used as an indicator. I've come across so many people in the industry that want to tweak, change, manipulate, turn it upside down, turn it back around again. And I think they eventually learn the less manipulation you do, the better it is. Use it as an indicator and then try and deal with the exceptions. Things happen, machines break down, I got to reschedule. Operators are off ill, then yes, you have to reschedule. But until you're there, try and just use it as an indicator. And then I never want to appear like someone that knew everything. I was a customer at one time, and I always like to joke I used the system in anger. And something that we got wrong right out of the starting gate was one big consideration: finite or infinite. And what I've done here is I've shown a setup screen on the top left there of the site parameters. And you can set a finite horizon up inside of Epicor to say, when I run that scheduling engine, if I have a finite resource, and an example of that is I could have a laser cutter or a Mazak CNC machine that's worth $1 million or more. It's available 24 hours a day, but it's finite. I can't just waltz out and buy another one, drill up, hammerjack the floor and put that new machine in. It's a finite resource. But then I've got people or labor that is infinite, because I could put an extra shift on if I'm overloaded. I can say to those people, I need you to work Wednesday night, Thursday night. I could potentially go and hire more people for seasonal work and so on. But that finite horizon really is, how far out do you really need to set that in your system? And if you think about it, then you can fine tune it right down at the resource level. It can never be more than what you set at the site. The system will warn you. But there are certain resources that if you get a picture of what I need to do finitely and load level that for the next 7 days, that's good enough. Thereafter, just make it infinite, and I can actually manage by peaks and troughs in there. But the general rule of thumb that I put up here, if it's machine driven, it's generally finite. If it's person driven, it's infinite. And when I implemented, we had both of those set to finite and couldn't understand why we were getting a realistic schedule, because everything that was person driven, where we would definitely have overloads, was now all load leveling out into the future. So we think we know it all. For those existing customers that are joining us today, go back and look at your site configuration. Go back and look at your resource configuration, or what you may call a work center today, and get that right. But I just thought I'd start with that valid lesson of what do we learn in industry, and what can we share with people as we go out there. So now let's take a little tour of the software inside of Kinetic. And I thought a good place just to start today would be the job scheduling board. And I'm going to bring various jobs in here and look at them as we go through the examples today. But first of all, let's just start with some unfirmed jobs. And unfirmed being, I've run MRP this morning in my system, Material Requirement Planning. And based on that, it's given me some job suggestions in here. So let's view the schedule for these job suggestions. Now, the job scheduling board is a live place. We can drag, we can drop left to right, and as you'll see shortly, we can even drag and drop if we wanted to, top to bottom or north to south, depending which way you want to look at that. But what I wanted to start with was just a job view of the cascading operations. This job is going to go through some laser cutting, some bending on a brake press. It's then going to go into the outside vendor heat treatment. So it will be out for a full day. That's a subcontract operation, as you can see there. And then it'll come back in for some painting and a final inspection operation. But I want you to note, first of all, a lot of people traditionally think operations are always finished to start. As you'll see here, I finish this operation, bending, then it goes out for outside heat treatment. That's got to happen. I can't have both happening at the same time, really. Well, maybe I could. But if you look at the laser op and you look at the bend op, this is using what we call an offset. So you can offset operations in Epicor by quantity. So after I run a certain quantity in operation, offset it and start the next operation. Or you can do it by percentage, or you can do it by time or hours. So after half an hour has passed, immediately start feeding that secondary operation. And that's another critical component that people miss when they're setting up the system and they're going from the crawl to the walk to the run, is think about how you can use these offsets. People that really know what they're looking for are going to test us to see if we can do that, because otherwise that whole overall lead time of that job would be elongated and much longer than it should be if we couldn't do that offset function in there. Now, if we just drill into this a little bit deeper and we start looking at some of these operations, if I go to my painting op, you'll see at the end there's a purple segment, that is what we call a move time. And generally after painting stuff, it comes off the paint line and it's hot and I don't want people touching it, or the paint could be soft and I just want it to harden a little while. So I'm applying at the resource group or work center an overall time of about an hour, just to say, you know, that's going to be a move time before I can start the next operation. And then my inspection team, the standards for my inspection may not be particularly accurate, but I want a buffer because of that. So I've just put a buffer in here of a couple of hours for inspection. So everything that comes in there, they've generally got to arrange it, get it ready before they start the inspection and get it sorted out. So I'm putting a buffer in there. Now, when we get into load leveling and such like, you can eradicate moving queue times. Once you get a little bit more, I suppose, into the scheduling engine and using it to do that, you can get rid of these if you want to. But I just wanted to point that out and what it looks like in a schedule within a job. So various jobs coming in there. Then what we'll do is let's go and search in here for some other parameters or other jobs that we can bring in as well. And I'm not going to look at a job. I'm actually going to look at a couple of projects now. So I've got a CAP 1000 project and I've got my counter battery radio project. Let's look at this one first. So you can also think about yourself as a project-based company. You're not really thinking about yourself as just pure manufacturing. You could be doing capital equipment manufacture. So you're doing things like design on the phase and so on. So you've got jobs out there to do design. You've got jobs out there to do engineering and such like. So we can actually look at my electrical engineering, my mechanical engineering that I need to do. I can look at the overall design that needed to be done. It's green, it's already done. And then I've got my manufacturing and my installations to do as well within that project. So we can get that project view within the job scheduling board as well as the manufacturing job views that you're seeing as well. So a nice overall place to manage or track jobs. And as you start to manipulate these, remember, we've tried to simplify everything in Kinetic for you. I could actually go right to job entry from here if I wanted to go and look at that job. It will kindly open another tab on the internet browser that I'm using, Google Chrome, or in this case, I'm using Microsoft Edge, and it will load that job up. So if I need the detail of what's going on for that particular job, I'm going to have it right at my fingertips within there. I can go into the assemblies, I can look at the operations in here, and I've got all the operational breakdown and drill down into that detail. I can move these jobs. So as I look at a particular operation, I could choose to move it either by dragging and dropping or choosing the move job. Now a slide out panel will come out and I could either set that back a date, move it up a date if I wanted to. And as you do this, remember, I don't want to just maybe move that operation. I actually might want to move the job and all the operations in here as well. There is a multi-job capability in Epicor 2 where you can actually move multiple jobs across multiple sites. So there is a scheduling connection when you have job-to-job links, either in the same site or multiple sites, and a site being a plant or a location within there. So that is the job scheduling board where I'm dragging left to right, right to left. Let's go and look a little bit deeper now at a resource scheduling board. So I might want to look at a particular work center or what we term a resource group inside of Epicor. So let's go ahead and I'll pull in my laser cutter here. I know I had some jobs in there and I can set the start date and the end date and then come in here and view that particular schedule of what's going on. Now, the reason I come in here is thinking bigger picture. We're not just interested in what's going on in manufacturing. There's a job here that's actually got a blue top hat in here and it starts with NTC and that denotes my maintenance jobs. So I've actually got a period on the 27th of December here that is currently out based on maintenance. And this is hugely important. It's not sitting in a disparate system. It's actually now inside of Epicor. And I know I've got 4 hours of maintenance that are being carried out on that particular resource group or resource at that time. And that can affect my overall production schedule because of that. So it's nice that you get that view in there where you're not only looking at your production jobs, I'm also looking at my maintenance jobs in here as well. There's the A1 that we were making. It looks like we've got a couple of jobs overlapping here. That can't really happen in real life. And the reason being is I actually brought you into the resource group, but that resource group actually contains 2 lasers. So part of the advanced planning and scheduling capability now gets me into what we call a multi-resource scheduling board. And I'm going to load this up, just search, and we'll pick both laser 1 and laser 2 in here now, and we'll view the schedule. And what you'll see is you'll actually note now that these laser cutters are separate and the jobs weren't running on the same resource. One's actually blocked out laser cutter 2 all the way back from Santa at Christmas Eve, all the way back to the 17th of December in here. So I can see that the jobs are running on different machines. Now what you can do in here is you can drag top to bottom. And some people always think, you know, as I drag something around, I'm always dragging left to right. But let's say you get a machine down, you could literally just drag from one machine to another. Or what I could do in here is I could actually toggle this into a job view. So now I'm looking at what jobs are running in each laser. And I could come into this particular job and say, you know what, I know I'm planning maybe some extra maintenance in here. I'm going to move that job off laser cutter 1, and I'm going to now move it down onto laser cutter 2, and I'm just going to schedule that. And now what happens is the what if is moved for me. And this is where we talk about what if scenarios. Everything that I do in a scheduling board is initially a what if move. And you can actually save on some of the scheduling boards, you can save the what if scenario, then maybe go and run the schedule impact report. But that change will not be accepted. The original time is still sitting up here until I decide to either accept that or undo the change. If I undo it, it's going to drop back. If I accept it, it will come in. I can put some scheduling comments in there as to why I've done this. So you've got all of that available within the schedule. So let's go ahead and we will accept that change. And I'm now going to make that job run on laser cutter 2. So that's part of advanced planning and scheduling. And if you think about it, as John mentioned, when I was looking at systems, advanced planning and scheduling systems used to cost almost as much as the ERP system itself. But we've embedded that module into the Kinetic system. So it's really just a module for us, giving us capabilities, giving us the multi-resource scheduling board that you're seeing here and other capabilities. John also mentioned just the ability to have some dashboards that you're maybe running out on the floor just to get a view of what's going on out there. So I've got one which I call my WIP dashboard. A lot of my customers have got this dashboard. It's been refined over the years. And this WIP dashboard, if I just start in this panel, it's just giving me a list of all of my jobs that are currently running out on the floor. And I've got a delinquency here where I could look at my most delinquent jobs. So I've got a couple here that I deliberately made late for the demo today. I did a global schedule and then went back and actually moved those back a little bit just so as they would show up late on this particular view. So I'm looking at jobs in here by delinquency. I'm also just looking at jobs that, you know, I'm maybe not so much interested in what's going on with the timing. If I go to this top panel, what jobs are overestimate because of material? Can I plan to do something about that? They're right there. I can see them. I could look at the same for overestimate with labor, subcontract, and burden. But it's just a nice indicator to let me look at those jobs. Again, because you're in a dashboard, if I need more details, I can actually right click and drill down into job entry from there if I wanted to. Or if I'm in a production meeting, I don't want to go into job entry. How many of you have production meetings where you write something down on a post-it note, you agree it, you say it, and then it's all lost in the ether? Being an updatable dashboard, I can just as a planner in my planner meeting now say, okay, job 2308, we're okay to run that, and it's agreed. I'm not going to be more specific than that. What I've just done there is I've actually just allowed myself what we call a save in there and an update to actually update that job. It's no different than me going into job entry, finding the comments box and updating it. I'm literally just allowing the update in there. So as we do the production meeting, I've got everything I need. And remember these grids too, we're a mixed mode system, planning and scheduling. Some jobs are going to be by customer. So there's all the jobs I'm running for Addison. Other jobs may be stock jobs. So I've got all of my stock or make to stock MRP jobs in there as well. So that's just a little look at a dashboard view of things that are going on within the system. We think about planning parameters, and that's the scheduling side. whenever we generate or we produce something, we need min-max safety levels. We need those types of parameters set up at the part level. So let me go into a couple of examples here. I'll go and look at this particular item. It's a purchased item, and I want to talk about some of the stocking policies or levels that you have within the system. And we'll zoom in just to have a closer look at this. I'm going to go to the site detail, and on the site detail, you'll see here I've got my min, I've got my max, I've got my safety level in here, and ability to reorder to max. Now what we're doing here is we're doing that at the site level. This particular component is actually in Rockford and it's all in Chicago. So you can actually plan based on your location to have different stocking policies. This is a smaller location. I only ever keep up to 250 there. There's maybe not much demand to ship out of there as there is out of that particular Chicago location that we were looking at there as well. So those are your key policies whenever you drive MRP into a part, whether you manufacture or procure it. That's going to help me actually decide what's going to happen. I've got my lead time in here. Now that lead time resides in other places. If you go into the supplier price list, you can be more accurate by supplier. It will look there first before it comes to the lead time at the part level. But as John said, part of that evolution of going through, crawl, walk, run is accurate lead times, not just at the operation levels we'll see shortly, but really at the part level. And that's something, again, you can use data management tool to update these. You could use an updatable dashboard to update those lead times as well. So some of the basic planning parameters in here. You can ease your way into this as well. You don't need to use all of these parameters day one, but you can certainly ease your way into them. And some of the parameters are really kept at a higher level. We have planning parameters at the part level, for example, reschedule in, reschedule out. I would rarely come into a part and set that up. I would set it at the part class. So it just means that I've got 500 parts that belong to my aluminum part class, the reschedule in and out delta. So that means if that's set to a day and it's now a day late or a day early, I don't care, because I don't want the system to reschedule it. I don't want a change suggestion. So rather than set that at the part, you'd only ever set that at the part if you were doing it by exception, for example. But planning parameters, when you make something, I make it in multiples of X, I make it in multiples of 100. I don't never run less than 100 at a time. I never run more than 1,000 at a time. It will take a new job. And we're about to look at days of supply, netting things together as well to stop multiple suggestions happening. And again, the nice thing about this is you may never use short horizon planning initially. You may never use the urgent planning parameters that are available. And then you can ease your way into that as you get into a system. Now, wouldn't it be nice to see all supply and demand in one place? Well, that's possible. So we've got the time phase in Epicor. And I'm sure some of you that are current users have seen this screen. So we're looking at the same part. And what I want to be able to see now is I want to be able to see in one place all supply being a receipt and all demand in one place. I can see my on hand in Chicago is 1,578. I can see in Rockford I've got 200 of those components. And then going out into the future, I can see my balance at the end of this at the 24th of January next year is back to 750. That is my safety plus my min. So that's like my reorder quantity. I'm not reordering to max. I'm not reordering to service level. But the interesting thing here is there's sales order demand, typically known as independent demand. I need 10 of these on that sales order 5391. I've got job demand on the same screen. That's dependent demand. I need 10 for each of these jobs going out into the future. And I'm also seeing forecast. That 300 has now been reduced to 290 because 10 of those consumed that forecast. Now, do you trust the system? As a planner, do I trust this, or do I want to still be an Excel champion and do all of this in Excel? The answer is no, because the system is leading me into a safe place. If I switch off the suggestions, suddenly I'm below reorder, I'm going below safety, and then life gets really bad on the 7th of January, I start to go below zero. But with suggestions on, be it this is a purchase suggestion, that will turn into a PO. If it was a job suggestion, it would be doing the same thing for me. It's going to look after me and make sure going out into the future that I'm not running into an exception status with those particular components. So that's just a little bit around supply and demand inside of the Epicor system. If we look back at the planner views and the scheduling boards, we were looking at job scheduling, we were looking at resource scheduling and so on. All of that is really driven by load. Whenever you have a job in a job scheduling board, how do I plan for that particular load? Just load that screen. Where does the load come from? So let's take a look at some of the operational setup within Epicor to get to that. So we'll go again and just look at those unfirmed jobs that MRP is suggesting that we run. And we'll pull in the A1 component. So operations will have durations against them. I've got a laser op that's got a certain duration, a bend op that's got a certain duration. That laser operation is being done on a certain resource. Why is that? It also needs the workforce from sheet metal. So it's not just saying run this in a laser, it's actually telling me that that laser op needs to also have a workforce associated with it as well. So I've got the machine component, I've got the labor component of that as well. Now, if we drill down into job entry, let's just look at a few key parameters on the operation to help us drive that. Operations, internal, external. You see a subcontract operation will be in a job. If you send things out for outside heat treatment, plating, whatever it will be, you'll see those on the operations. But there is the laser operation on the job. And in that operation, I've got a production standard where I'm saying I'm doing 100 of those in pieces per hour. Plus, you may have a setup time. I've got a 0.25 hour setup time in there. And we can use things like setup groups as you get more into the planning side and the scheduling side of the system, where when we load level for the next 3 days, I could bring similar gauges of steel together to reduce setup time. If it's a paint line, I want to go light to dark. So I want to eradicate setup time as well by arranging all of those in light to dark. And then if we drill down into the operation, that operation can have what's called a resource against it. So where am I doing this particular operation? Well, in this case, I've got the laser cutter that I'm actually utilizing to do that operation. So you've got your scheduling resources. I've got the laser, I've got the sheet metal workforce, and if I drill down into that, when the scheduling engine actually ran, it's actually scheduled that for me in Laser Cutter 1. And I can see the production calendar availability of that laser cutter, 16 hours per day, 5 days per week. But I also need the sheet metal workforce as well. And I can see it's actually picked up an employee here based on a skill level. So advanced planning and scheduling actually allows you to bring in things like capabilities eventually. It's not just enough to say an operation is going in a certain resource. I'm going to be very specific about that resource because of a constraint whenever I actually schedule it onto the operation. So all of your routing steps will be in Epicor, along with the bill of materials, the actual materials required to run that as well. And what John was referring to earlier with what we call the MOM, the method of manufacture, is all in here. Now, one of the powerful things about Epicor is we don't need to do all of this independently. You can have certain jobs out there that will actually require sub-assemblies to be manufactured. It's what we call pool as assembly or view as assembly jobs out there. So if I go and look at a job number 2153 in here, this is actually for a multi-level frame assembly. And that multi-level frame assembly, the DCD 200ml, has got sub-assemblies built within it. So I've got my top level operation, which is just assembly, final inspection, wrap and ship. But I've got sub-assemblies within here. And then I can have sub-assemblies within sub-assemblies as well if I wanted to. So I'm going down multiple levels. And if I go and look at this particular sub-assembly, it's going to have its own operations associated with it, saw, turn and drill, and its own raw material. So I'm down about 5 levels here looking at that sub-assembly. And these are all made as what we call pool as assembly and view as assembly, where it will have to make that part in the same job, it makes the frame before I can make the final component. I also need to make the bracket before I can make the final component as well. Now, the nice flexibility in Epicor is you could also have had those set up as a traditional make-to-stock subassembly. So it now is an inventory, it's got a min, max, and safety associated with it, and it would just have said instead, bring that in as a material, and if it goes below a certain min level, there'll be a reorder job or an MRP job to then make it instead. So we've got that flexibility, and that can be changed on the fly, incidentally. At any job, I could change the behavior of that subassembly if I wanted to. So remember, make to order, make to stock, job to job links, and we're truly a mixed mode system within the planning side of it. So in terms of just a quick overview of some of the system capabilities, that is what I wanted to show. And I'm just going to ask John, is there anything else perhaps that you wanted me to show to do this justice?
Well, Stephen, I think you've done a great job at showing off the capabilities of Epicor. We know it can go so much deeper. I don't know that this is the forum to get that specific, but I think the appreciation that Epicor has the capability, it has the, the parameters to which you can profile your capacity, see the value within your organization. I think it's very powerful. And, as we said, it's a broad topic. So Stephen, as a past production manager, or having a role in the overall scheme of things, do you have any experiences or stories you want to share with us, just in terms of how, how you've exposed certain things that perhaps management thought was a problem? I'm putting you on the spot, so don't mean to.
No, I mean, I'm always happy to share stories. I mean, I had a great production director, and as someone that was trying to implement systems, the first big thing is I always talk about is culture, is bringing an ERP system like Kinetic into your organization as a culture change. We had about 120 direct employees out on the floor that all had to be trained for some form of data collection using the shop floor data capture. We did want real-time data capture in a number of the processes, and one story I'll share is I thought we were going to do real-time data capture on every single operation, and my production director at the time took me into his office and quietly told me, and it wasn't very quiet at all, we're not doing that, you'll grind the business to a halt. So a lot of operations were just quantity only. Some operations were what we term backflush, where I've got a guy in a saw sawing a steel billet. I don't need him doing time and quantity booking on and off it. The subsequent op thereafter, whenever we start machining it, will backflush the sawing op. So you want to lean out your operation and introduce that culture change. I can have a very accurate routing without having people having to book on and off every single operation that's out there. So that's something I would share to people, is try and keep it as simple as you can for the people on the floor. Keep your bills of material as flat as possible when you get out onto production, using things like phantom bills of material. The simpler it is, the easier life is going to be. A lot of the planning parameters, we use things like min-max safety levels to start with, then we eased our way into things like urgent planning parameters and such like. We didn't use them initially. So you're going to evolve as you get into this. And something I always talk about when I demo and people want to see is they want to see capable to promise. They think this capable to promise is just going to save everybody. Sales are going to be able to run that. But if you think about capable to promise, for that to be accurate, out in the shop floor, you need to be doing real-time data capture. If you're only putting time in using timesheets at the end of every week, it's not accurate. You're only getting that accurate at the end of every week you run it. Lead times and parts, if you don't have accurate lead times on those constrained materials, again, if one's out of stock and you run CTP, you're not going to see a reflection of that. And the last one, and it is a hard one, is production standards. I went into an operation earlier on a job, and I showed you in that job what the production standard was actually set to in an operation. Keeping your production standards up to date on an operation can also be a challenge, getting those accurate as well. And that's required if you want to run things like capable to promise as well. So I think the underlying message, John, it's people, process, and technology. It is an evolution. It's not all going to happen day one sometimes.
Absolutely. You know, Stephen, I kind of look back at, you know, both your presentation and what we've all experienced, and I'm sure at the end of this call we'll have a lot of communication around other scenarios people have run into. But good scheduling is really the orchestration of all that's happening on the critical path that where you deliver and how you deliver your products and your production. And when we look at it, it's really not just planning, and as you mentioned, the importance of proper execution, which includes the collection of production data, but it's the analysis. And when we ask the question, well, who does the scheduling? It's really the person who's going to do the analysis and provide options for management, which could be focused on capacity, could be focused on profit, could be focused on customer service.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just popped that message back in the screen. When used as an indicator, because things happen. No system, I mean, you could spend all your time getting it right down to the nth level of detail by the minute. We can schedule by the minute in Epicor, but sometimes it's best used as an indicator. Here's the plan that we want to work. Let's try and work the plan. So plan the work the plan, but things break out on the floor. Do I want to reflect that in my schedule? If it's bad enough, I can go into the multi-resource scheduling board, pull all those jobs onto another machine. But if it's only going to interrupt the schedule for the next 30 minutes, I'm not going to touch anything. I'm going to leave it there as an indicator, and I'll pick up the slack.
That's a great quote, and it's very practical. And keeping it grounded as people, process, technology, I think is a great way to approach that. I'm going to go ahead and show my screen again, and we're going to finish up with some Q&A here. Just
thanks, John.
Super. Okay. And we're okay. So, you know, one of the things that is really important as you're an ERP, you know, specialist who's implementing and helping clients, in our role, you can learn so much from the shop floor, and definitely a shop floor tour by the right people. So I had the occasion recently to tour a shop floor where the person was constructively critical, and that tour was focused on a little bit about capacity, where they're running into some challenges. And one of the things that is very common is most smaller businesses believe most of the time it's all about buying a new machine. If we bought this new machine, it would give us more capacity. And then, you know, a really good question to ask is, do you really know the utilization of that machine? Because rarely is purchasing a new machine and creating more capacity the only factor that's involved. And there's many levers that a company can pull to increase output, increase capacity, and prioritize work. There's really no magic. And if I look at what scheduling as a whole can do for a client on their journey of better operational performance, it really comes down to understanding that all these schedule changes really have a big impact. They have an impact on order delivery, the capacity that you need to manage more or less by work center, the material supplier demand, cash flow, and it has a big impact on the business in terms of their ability to grow and profit. But there's really no magic. Many times we miss the opportunity to partner with the current planner because they think maybe we're bringing in some hocus pocus and they don't trust it. The reality is that everybody out there needs to cost track and schedule their business. But it's really about what level of detail do you need to. And as Stephen has shown, you can drill into each operation or each work center or department or resource, and you can analyze it differently. Is this truly a bottleneck, or is it just a busy department? And having that information is so key to understanding where you can pull those levers. And so those levers, oddly enough, don't change a whole lot, but the decision criteria that we bring to the table becomes much more accurate and speedy. Because one of the things that a good production planner scheduler can tell you is that they can figure it all out on a spreadsheet. They absolutely can. I'd ask at what effort and how timely, because typically what's going on is that kind of process worked when they were young and they only had so much product and they were only so big as a company. But ultimately, when they do these manual processes, if they were to figure it out to the extent that we can, first off, I'd challenge them because I don't think you can do all of these things in terms of the analysis tools we bring to the table. But second, by the time you figured it out, the week has ended and everything is no longer accurate. Some other feedback loops have to be pumped into it. And that's really what Epicor does very, very well. It's an online transactional database. And when you align those processes, we're going to give them the information. And there's really only 3 or 4 things you can really do once you know that information. You can add capacity. You can manage materials differently through expedites or delays. And you can prioritize work. We're going to run this product instead of this product. And this is going to have this result. So really, Epicor Kinetic is the backbone for our companies that use this extensively, and there are many that use it. And I'll say this, each one of them slightly differently based on their needs. And they're all on a journey. Some of them have got to a place where in order to take that next step, they need to make bigger investments in people and process, and they need to have people aligned at a deeper level to get to that next step. So earlier on, Stephen, you had mentioned things, and we had talked about this, is really where to start, and how does a customer get started with this? And this is not a big bang approach. The best approach is really to take one product and follow it all the way through the steps. Focus on the cause and effect of the parameters that you can employ within the Epicor system, within the Kinetic system, and start to understand the insights that you'll gain as you turn this on. And as you get those insights, understand that as a template, you can now roll this out to all the other product lines and all the other work centers and resources and start to get those same insights. And you'll actually start to find capacity you never knew you had, and also bottlenecks that you never realized that you could solve. So I think the insights is probably the biggest, most powerful piece of that. And so on that theme, I want to share a couple of scenarios for customers. So in many industries, it's really important, and there's a certain autonomy on the shop floor that people in production actually have information that they can act on. So there's one of our customers sharing performance by work center in the shop floor. They're using touch screens to capture the shop production. They're giving dashboards and meters associated with certain lines and their productive capacities. There's other companies that are more project-based, and they still have work centers that need to be managed to, and they build dashboards to highlight how well they're tracking at the various operations and the flow of each job and the impact that it's having across the board. Now, let's recall that everything in Epicor is integrated. If a material is not available, that work center, that resource will be scheduled accordingly. It'll pick the next job that needs to be run in order to keep capacity balanced. So I think, we are dealing with a very powerful product in Kinetic, one that needs a little bit more attention to detail when it comes to this topic of planning and scheduling. In the world we live in, we always have competition. I'll use some examples, ones that I've had some experiences with. Visual manufacturing, they really tout the theory of constraints scheduling capability. But they do have challenges. They have challenges in their what ifs, and their what ifs go stale. That was kind of the example I was using earlier, that by the time you figure something out, then you have to backward update the live schedule. You run the risk of overwriting things that are really important. There are products out there that do some of the theory of constraints and prioritization, like Rope Weaver. Preactor has been a long staying in the market product that has been out there for quite some time, and the names go on and on and on, and these are third-party bolt-ons that people will add to any ERP system because they believe that it may or may not be sufficient for their needs. So that, I would say that yes, we have other competition, but when it really comes down to it, because Epicor is an APS, make sure that we're talking apples to apples, because most ERP systems do not have an APS built in. They need those third-party pieces. Got a couple examples, some of the things that you should be aware of, and I'm just picking on one example, and that is IQMS. IQMS was really made for the plastics industry. that tends to be where some of their functionality, their legacy has come from. And we were actually presented this by a prospective client who said to us that, geez, you're the only ones that we've seen who can do quantity-based send ahead. So operation to operation, being not waiting for a whole batch or production run to be complete, I can move it on to secondary operations for flow. And IQMS does not have that capability. Epicor, however, not only allows quantity-based, but it also does percentage and time. Products like NetSuite, they really do not have a proper planning and scheduling engine. They fail on a few areas, MRP as well as scheduling. And I'm not aware of the third parties, but they would require a third party to schedule effectively. So constraints-based scheduling means considering all the things that could stop you from a productive schedule. So as we kind of get to the end of this meeting, we're going to get some Q&A going. But I do want you to know there's lots of literature out there. So get out to the portal. There's sales literature. I would suggest that APS be highlighted as a separate topic or an advanced topic with more emphasis. This is a good document. However, I think it's about 8 pages. It speaks to a lot of the capabilities of Epicor's planning and scheduling. At a deeper level, the technical reference guide, it's going to show you exactly how to set those parameters, the cause and effect of those parameters, and it's really meant for, you know, the deep expert in the company together with the training resource who's going to get involved in these topics. And then finally, training materials. I know a lot's been done. There's currently being changed, but the traditional screens are being converted to kinetic, and I know there's videos and such, but this is a deep topic, so I would suggest there's an opportunity there for this topic to be probably drilled into a little further from a training perspective. Okay. Maybe we should open up the lines and see if there's any questions out there for people that are, you know, happy to take on scenarios or learn from scenarios. We're all on a journey of learning here as well.
Yeah, I've just been trying to go through some of the questions online there.
Okay.
So I think I got most of them. Yeah. So initially I was looking in the chat, but there was actually a questions panel, John. So I think I got them.
Oddly enough, I'm not, oh, there they go, okay.
You can pop it out.
Yeah, we see it now. Okay, Stephen, do you want to maybe help us with the first one of a job delay? There's a process.
Yeah, no, I actually answered that. So there are a couple of ways, but generally what you're going to do is you're going to go to that machine or what we call resource in Epicor. You'll pick the period of time where you've got the overload situation. Could be a number of days or it could be over a week. You will then do what you call a load level because you want to affect all operations in that time scale. And then once you do that, you would also probably then say on those jobs that you also want to reschedule the subsequent operations, and you would do it as a what if. And once you run the what if, then you can actually go and run what we call the change impact informer report, and that will actually give you the overall picture of which jobs have now become late as a count, jobs that may become early, and if it's make to order, it actually even gives you the dollar impact, or if it's on a price list, it will give you the dollar impact of that change as well. Failing that, some companies will do a global reschedule. So they'll move particular jobs, lock them, and then do a global reschedule. The next question there is, I think
let's read the question because everyone who's listening to this in the future won't see the question. So how about I read it and you answer it. How popular are the concepts developed by Eli Goldratt and or Apex for scheduling in 2021? We're still getting requests from customers who are asking for that. Does Kinetic align themselves with those things?
Yeah, I mean, I put in there, yeah, it's very popular in lean, just-in-time environments. When we go to companies that are doing continuous manufacture or continuous flow, could be a production line, they make boats. It's very popular there. They get into things like takt time, the drum buffer rope theories that Eli Goldratt put through. You've always got one work center that is always your constraint, and it's like an hour saved there is really not an hour saved at all because it's the drumbeat of the rest of the process, if you like. So we do see a lot of companies when we go to implement and we go and sell that they are really trying to adhere to the theory of constraints and what is in that book. It is still very popular.
I have a comment on that one, Stephen, and I like Lynn's question. I would say that this is probably more relevant than it's ever been. If I've been in ERP for just over 32 years, 33 years now, and even when it was MRP, scheduling was part of it, material planning, supply chain. As we've indicated in the earlier part of the presentation, that journey also is a journey of people and developing people. And the current situation we're in now in constrained supply chains and materials is no different than any other crisis. There could be, a flood in Japan that knocks out electronics chip manufacturers as it did years ago. We'll always have some form of delays, but the science is not particularly new. MRP was an algorithm written in 1968 by Eli Goldratt. Sorry, not Eli. So apologize. Ollie White, George Schlossel, and Dick Lilly. And working with Dick, he always gave a presentation once a year that I knew the man, and he would speak about the emperor has no clothes. And the point of his presentation was that it's easy to talk about planning and scheduling and organizational controls, but what skin have you got in the game? And he said, it's one thing to be able to just buy the software and hit the easy button. It's another thing to really own it. And that means owning it from top down and bottom up. That means everybody's on board. It's part of your culture. It's where you're going. So in a long answer to a short question, I think it's super relevant because these are time-proven ways to solve these problems. And I'm surprised at how many people think they can go off and write a software package and then they miss a lot of what has already been time-proven. Epicor is very much aligned with Apex and Capex. It very much can. We've got customers that have made sure that their KPIs and benchmarks within Kinetic allows them to measure it with a Goldratt theory of constraints approach with drum, buffer, and rope. And so I think this is the place for us to, in the year 2022, as we look at the re-onshoring that's happening in North America, the rejigging of manufacturing around the globe, the many people that have retired with so much of this knowledge and the need to impart this knowledge and proven tools to a client that still has the same problems since manufacturing began. So, I think this is a great opportunity for us in the Kinetic ecosystem to help our clients and really start to understand how these concepts deliver value to our clients. Any other questions from the group? Do you want to open up the microphone for the participants? Does anyone?
Yeah, I think the lines are unmuted, John. So
Okay.
if anyone has questions on the line, feel free to ask those. Looks like one more came in chat.
Yeah, I would say that this last question is having a certification for Apex still relevant? Absolutely. When you wade into simple concepts like min-max and reorder points, Apex was the organization that championed the standardization of those calculations. But it goes much further than that. Being a CPIM and a certified supply chain person brings a lot of value, and being able to apply that to how people, process, and technology can move through that journey. We're not going to apply level 3 solutions to a company who's just kicking the tires of trying to schedule, but understanding that someone who has that knowledge can help them through this. I think it's very relevant because this is a deep topic. Any other questions? Well, I hope you found this a valuable session. I thank my co-host here, Stephen. Thank you so much for the in-depth presentation.
Thanks,
and
John.
hopefully we've given everybody a bit of a taste of what's Epicor Kinetic Scheduling can do for them and their clients.
Yes, John, Stephen, well done. Thank you so much for putting this presentation together. Like we said, it'll be recorded. We'll put it out on the program hub, and then the documents that John referenced for planning and scheduling management, those are out there as well in the same widget that the recording will be in. So you'll be able to find those rather quickly. And then John, I was just going to point out, we're working with product management to see if we can get more content on APS. I know you were talking about that being a separate document, so that's something we're working on. So I just wanted to let you know that and let the group know.
Super.
And
Yeah, references as well. If anyone has great examples, I think we need examples at various stages of the journey, because I think it helps our clients really relate. So if we could maybe focus on that as a group, that'd be awesome.
yeah, that's a great point. And we took that as a takeaway for some of those updated documents. So we're going to work with Rachel and team and see if there's anything else that we can do and make sure that we're putting a focus on getting some more of those updated out there for you all to utilize. And then I know we ran long, but just for everyone's sake, January 7th, we'll cover supply chain management with Epicenter and the SE. I think David Beck will do the demo for that. So if there aren't any other questions on the line, I think we'll close it out. So thanks again, John and Stephen. Great job today, and thank you all for joining.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you,
Thank
Danielle.
you. Thank you.
Thanks to my team. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Success Partners. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.